I grew up in Penclawdd, coastal village, cockle picking village, as was on the north coast of the Gow Peninsula, before I left to go to university and the academy and on into the world, as it were. My father was a huge influence. He was a school teacher who taught art and music, funnily enough, as a combination. But he was an amateur musician and played in local chapel, organist and choir master, and ran choirs. So my first awareness of music was through him, really, him playing at home, LP collection he had. So that was the kind of grounding I had. Then I went to Gowton Boys Grammar School, as it was then, and learnt the oboe. Then a succession of youth orchestras, local school orchestra, West Glamorgan, National Youth Orchestra Wales. Developed an interest in jazz in my teenage years, and then went to read music at Cardiff University with a postgraduate here at the Royal Academy of Music, London. As a teenager, I didn't like what was kind of passing for contemporary classical music then, which was very aleatoric and dissonant and serial and atonal. So jazz appealed because it was always vibrant and exciting. And I lived it, very fortunately, in a period where kind of seminal albums were coming out by artists, not just in jazz. I mean, Beatles albums were released, and in jazz, Miles Davis in America was a kind of idol of mine, and his various bands. In fact, Kind of Blue, which is one of the most famous jazz records ever, I think it's the best-selling jazz album of his sextet. That was released when I was influenced by all these kinds of things. So it's kind of exciting period that all these iconic musicians were of that same period as me, I suppose, which I guess was a post-war thing. I mean, we're all children of the 60s, not children of the 60s, but born so that we were teenagers and in our 20s in the 60s kind of thing, you know. So I think it was a pivotal time in many ways. But apart from the jazz influence, of course, I still kind of followed my academic musical studies. And I suppose my favorite, I've always tried not to categorize music, because to me it's all the same 12 notes and it's all the same provided it has value. Not all the same, but the same worthiness, if you like. So classically it was the usual kind of German, Austrian composers from Bach through Mozart to Beethoven, and then later Wagner and Mahler and Richard Strauss. I suppose that was my favorite kind of, if you want to place it geographically, it was that part of Europe, composers. As I say, I didn't appreciate others like Debussy and Stravinsky and Bartók, of course. Well, I have a big year next year, 1975, and that is my 75th birthday. Did I say 1975? I'll go again. Well, it's a big year next year. It's my 75th year, 2019. So I have the UK tour, 5 major concert halls: Albert Hall, Cardiff, Bridgewater, Manchester, Birmingham, Scotland, so forth. And I'm working on a setting of the Miserere text, which is essentially Psalm 50 or 51, according to the numbering, various numbering for these things. And it's the famous work, the text of that, well, the work itself by Allegri that Mozart heard in the Sistine Chapel and notated it from memory. It's probably more famous for that than anything else. But it's a setting on that text that many composers have done through history. But with a slightly different slant in that I use other texts from, apart from the Latin Christian text, I use texts from other sources as well. As I tend to do. So that's like a long-term project. And I'm working on an album of my most well-known pieces for solo piano, which I'm performing, which will be quite a task because I'm not that great a pianist. So it'll be an interesting project, but with the wonders of technology nowadays, it's doable without too much cheating. For many years I had 2 dwellings, one in Wales and one in London, so for various reasons, not to do with anything other than the stress of running two places and the travelling involved. Because I had a house on Gower Peninsula and an apartment in London, which I retained. But we sold the house in Gower, and my son is this end, and my two grandchildren and his wife, so it made sense to be this end rather than the Welsh end. But I go to Wales every couple of months, or 6 weeks, couple of months for a few days anyway. But I have to be in London or near it, and for work, and I always find it a vibrant city, really. And musically it's amazing. Wales means a great deal to me. I mean, I grew up there. It's a weird childhood. It was not weird, but I had a Swedish grandfather, funnily enough. I mentioned Penclough as a cockle picking village, and my grandmother, that particular one, was a cockle picker. I met my grandfather. He was a Swedish sailor and sailed into Newport docks, and they met in Newport, and she was selling cockles there. So they settled, and he became they were my grandparents on one side, but on my mother's side. But she sadly drowned in the Bury estuary along with 8 other cockle pickers when a freak tide came in. This was before I was born. This would have been in the 1930s. But my roots are still very much Welsh. You know, although I've probably lived more of my life in London than in Wales. I've strong ties there. I've no family left, but many friends. I support Welsh rugby, obviously. And I still see it as home in most ways. I'd like to thank the organisers for presenting me with the Glyndŵr Award. It's a huge honour, and I feel privileged to be the recipient of it, because I can't be there, unfortunately, due to prior commitments of other work, recording and concerts. Nevertheless, it means a great deal to me, and I shall cherish it. And I hope you'll enjoy this brief interview in place of me being there in person. So thank you all once again, and to those of you who have supported me through many years.